Boa tarde para quem está chegando, gente. Boa tarde, boa noite. Eventualmente, vou fazer a sugestão para a gente abrir a câmera, para a gente se olhar, para a gente se sentir. Ainda mais que a gente estava nesse curso totalmente presencial, né? E agora a nossa primeira incursão online. Eu desaprendi a fazer isso do online. Estou feliz de ter desaprendido, na verdade. Muito ansioso pelo contato. E dizer que a gente vai esperar dar uns 5 minutinhos, no máximo. O nosso professor hoje, o Steven, já está aqui com a gente, mas a gente vai dar 5 minutinhos para começar. Então, quem quiser pegar uma aguinha, fazer o L... vocês já estão gravando, né, gente? Então isso aqui já está meio que ficando para a história, né? Então, como isso aqui é um documento também de memória, né, para a memória de ambas as instituições, é importante dizer para quem acessar isso aqui no futuro, que está sendo gravado no dia 31/10/2022, um dia após o resultado das eleições que elegeram novamente Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva para a presidência do Brasil. A primeira vez que um presidente em mandato não é reeleito, então mais um recorde negativo para o currículo, para o CV, para o resume do Bozo. Então esse é o clima de hoje, né? Acho que não tem como ignorar. Eu queria deixar esse statement aqui para a história, que quem estiver assistindo a gente no futuro vai olhar para as peles maravilhosas de todos nós e vai entender que é o bálsamo das eleições, é o resultado das eleições. Então é isso, a gente começa formalmente daqui a 3 minutinhos, tá, gente?
Importante acrescentar a fala do Heitor que o Lula venceu pela 3ª vez uma eleição presidencial. Então, uau!
E o curioso, né, para quem programa as coisas, né, para quem é programador, para quem é curador, né, para quem coloca coisas e pessoas juntas, é que a gente aqui toma um risco, né, Márcia Vaz, de programar essa conversa um dia depois das eleições, né? Então, que bom que a gente está aqui num clima de felicidade, de celebração, porque a gente poderia só ter colocado o Steven numa grande cilada, não é mesmo? Imagina o clima.
Mas olha só, hoje a gente está aqui em clima de comemoração. Se não fosse em clima de comemoração, seria em clima de afeto e de cuidado. Então, estaríamos juntos do mesmo jeito.
Estaríamos juntos do mesmo jeito. Eu tô aqui, por mim é isso, né, gente? Eu só quero falar, eu só quero falar de 13, velho. Mas não, bora lá. Quer saber do? Eu falei que a gente ia esperar até 5 minutos, mas dane-se, vamos começar.
Vamos.
Chega, botar essa energia para fora, vamos compartilhar esse momento. Então a gente está oficialmente começando. Boa noite, boa noite, boa noite, boa noite, boa noite. Como coloquei no começo, pelo menos para quem está chegando, pelo menos nesse começo de conversa, quem sentir a vontade para abrir a câmera e a gente se ver, qualquer que seja o contexto, quem estiver cozinhando, quem estiver andando com o cachorro, quem estiver lavando roupa, ou quem estiver sentado aqui na frente do computador, do celular, sentir a vontade para abrir a câmera, bora lá, até porque, como eu falei no começo, a gente está num curso que é majoritariamente presencial, e para quem dá aula, né, sabe o quão desafiante é dar aula sem poder enxergar e ver os nossos interlocutores, né? A gente chegou na 3ª aula do curso, então relembrando esse caminho que a gente fez até agora, né, numa primeira aula, certa sensibilização da maneira que as pessoas negras encontraram para se inscrever ao longo da história, sendo a fotografia um desses recursos. Aí tivemos aquele encontro bem emocionante, mediado pelo álbum de fotografia da minha família, comigo e com meu pai. Aí, no segundo encontro, a gente foi para alguns fundamentos da preservação e tentamos trabalhar com marcadores realistas, né? Então, estudamos ali uma certa história da preservação e depois fomos enegrecendo essa história e também abrasileirando essa história, entendendo o que é possível, o que faz sentido aqui para a gente, né? E agora, nessa terceira aula, para a qual a gente tem um convidado que me deixa assim, muito orgulhoso e muito feliz dele ter topado essa jornada com a gente vai fazer algo que não é feito com tanta constância, ou com a constância que deveria, né? Que é enviadecer e sapatonizar os arquivos, né? Os arquivos, as memórias, né? Elas tendem a repetir certas estruturas da sociedade, né? Então, se a gente vive numa sociedade cis-heteronormativa, os arquivos, por sua vez, tendem a repetir essa estrutura, né? E a gente vai, como se diz em inglês, né? Queer the archive, né? A gente vai, numa tradução possível, enviadecer o arquivo. Então, nada mais adequado para poder falar sobre isso, sobre o que isso significa e o que isso implica, na verdade. A gente tem um arquivista, um curador e um amigo, né? Uma das pessoas mais generosas que eu conheço, que é o Stephen G. Fullwood, que já vai tomar a palavra e falar. Imagino que agora, depois de 2 anos e alguma coisa de pandemia, a gente já esteja familiar como utiliza o recurso aqui da interpretação, né? Então, para quem precisa de tradução simultânea, quem não se sente confortável escutando inglês, é só ir aqui embaixo, apertar o botãozinho interpretação ou tradução ou interpretation, dependendo de como tiver o zoom aí de vocês, e aí vocês escolhem o canal que vocês gostariam de escutar, né? Então, para quem precisa escutar em português, clica ali o canal português ou português, e para quem precisa ou quer escutar em inglês, clica o canal English ou English. É isso. Eu só tenho aqui, só alegria e... por fim, quem está entrando e câmera ligada, top, não deixar mudo o microfone, né? Pensando disso. E eu tô tão atabalhado que eu já não ia deixar você falar, né, Morcha? Já estava passando por cima de você. É o
Mas eu tava no gancho, aqui.
Fala, Morcha.
Bom, gente, eu vou fazer as vezes institucionais, sobretudo porque, como o Heitor disse, a gente precisa contextualizar o que vai ficar registrado, embora vocês ouçam isso todas as aulas. Esse é um projeto muito caro para a gente. Estamos na 4ª edição do Memórias Pretas em Movimento, oficina de preservação audiovisual, que vem se desenhando ao longo dessas 4 edições e, enfim, a cada ano a gente melhora um pouco mais. Esse ano tem sido muito especial. É um projeto do Instituto Moreira Salles com o Instituto Nicho 54, é uma co-realização, uma parceria muito frutífera para todos nós, sobretudo para o IMS, ter a parceria do Nicho 54. Esse é o Heitor Augusto, diretor e fundador do Nicho 54. Eu sou a Márcia Vaz, programadora de cinema do IMS. Lucas Gonçalves, que está aqui comigo, é o assistente de programação da casa. Maria Moreto é supervisora de eventos, junto com Raquel Len, que também é supervisora de eventos aqui em São Paulo. Queria agradecer a todo mundo que, enfim, faz com que essa oficina seja possível. Também temos o Thiago Galego, que não está aqui agora, que também é da programação de cinema, e a Karen Almeida, que é a coordenadora de produção curatorial do Nicho 54. Bom, desejo a vocês uma ótima aula. Steven, bem-vindo, e agora é contigo.
Hola, everyone. My name is Stephen G. Fullwood. I'm the former assistant curator of the Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books Division at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library. I am also the co-founder of the Nomadic Archivists Project. And I'm also the exhibition coordinator for Marking Time, Art and Age of Mass Incarceration, and the lead archivist for a project called Archiving marking time. I want to thank Lucas. I want to thank Marcia, Raquel, and everyone who invited me, who made this happen today. And I want to send a special shout out to Heitor, who I met earlier this year, who I absolutely love and adore his brain and his heart. And I love the work that he's doing. And I'm looking forward to working with him in the future on a number of archival or art projects, or however we can connect. I'm going to speak slowly because this is being translated in Portuguese. I wish I knew more Portuguese. I know very little other than bom dia, cafe, I think a couple of other things, so please forgive me. It's all love. I would love to share my PowerPoint with you right now so that I can give you some visuals and some moving images and tell you a little bit about why I'm here today. And then I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. The title of my presentation today is called "We Must Always Bury Our Dead Twice," or Queering the Archive, Black Lives in the Life. Being an archivist is second nature to me. And throughout my presentation, I hope it becomes evident to you about why this work matters to me, but why it also should matter to you. You see the photograph here to the right. There are a number of people who appeared at the Fire and Ink Writers Festival. It was a writer festival that I was a co-president of for the last few years of its life. We brought together a number of artists, writers, different kinds of writers who were identified as people of African descent and queer in some manner, shape, or form. I'll tell you a little bit about a couple of those people there later on in the PowerPoint. My understanding of an archive is that it is any place where memory exists, that is accessible, and that is mutable. So an archive for me can be in an institution, it could be in a community archive, it could be in someone's house, it can take form of genealogy, history, and so forth. It's important that archives are places, really for me, of imagination, of what's possible. Archives are also very exclusive in the sense that not one archive can collect everything. Not even all the archives that exist today, now and in the past, could not collect our entire future. But what we're hoping to do as archivists is to have fidelity to our communities, to capture those histories, to preserve those histories, and to share those stories. And I start out my talk with a woman who I really admire. Her name is Barbara Smith. She's one of the co-founders of the Kitchen Table Press, which was a women of color press that was founded in 1980, along with Audre Lorde. A number of artists came out of there, including Cheryl Clark, Sherry Moraga, and a number of other women of color who produced works for the press. I spoke with Barbara Smith when I was creating a book called Black Gay Genius. And Black Gay Genius was a love letter to Joseph Beam, who was the editor of the first Black gay anthology called In the Life, a Black Gay Anthology. Joseph Beam died before he finished working on his second book, which became Brother to Brother, New Writings by Black Gay Men, which was finished by Essex Hemphill, the poet. I'll be talking about him later on, and Joseph Beam's mother, Dorothy Beam, who I adore. I wish I had more lives because I'd write a biography about her because she was that amazing. But to get back to Barbara Smith and I talked about Joseph Beam, who she knew, who reached out to her to ask her for advice on how to start a press, how to do an anthology. He wrote a letter that began with help. And he wrote both Barbara Smith and Audre Lorde this letter. And so what Barbara and I did was I start the book off with an interview with her because not only did she know him, but she figured greatly into Joseph's life as a colleague, as a foremother, as a literary, someone that you admired, someone you wanted to take after. And what in the book, The Truth That Never Hurts by Barbara Smith, it's a collection of her writings. She has an essay called We Must Always Bury Our Dead Twice, And what she says in it is very important. I'm going to read it out loud here because it's very important to me as an archivist to ground my work in community. Without it, I'm just a collector. For the handful of us who are out Black, lesbian, and gay writers, our work is obviously cut out for us. Sadly, we must always bury our dead twice. The tributes in these pages are one effort to do that with an integrity missing from the official ceremony. Undoubtedly, we will organize countless memorial gatherings in the months and years to come, where we will not be afraid to speak of James Baldwin as a Black gay brother. Now, she wrote, "We must always bury our dead twice," because she went to the funeral of James Baldwin in 1988, December of 1988. And although there were a number of luminaries who spoke about James Baldwin and their relationship to him, either as relatives or as colleagues, as activists, no one spoke about him as about his queerness, about his homosexuality. And Barbara was there with a friend of hers and they were irritated. But what Barbara came to understand was that we must always bury our dead twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times, because we need to remember them. And part of remembering them is the archive. What you can expect today is to learn more about my own origin story as it relates to the In the Life Archive, which is an archive that I actually founded to aid in the documentation of preserving, collecting, and making available to the public materials produced by and about people of African descent who identify as LGBTQ+. I'm going to tell you about how the archive developed, and I'm also going to share some information about the people who are doing this work beside me. There's so many people doing amazing archival work, and I'm just going to share some of their names with you today. And also I'm going to talk about what I think is important, which is my next step in terms of the archive itself. Breaking open the archive, different ways of thinking about how we can save our own memories and effectively save ourselves. This is a question I have for you guys later, but I want to give you some time to think about it. You know, why is it important to archive yourself? No one can answer this question for you. It's a question you have to ask for yourself. And it doesn't matter what your station in life is, whether you are a professional or non-professional, whether or not you have economic means or you're rich or you're poor. Why is it important to archive yourself? And then just write down 3 reasons. I'd love to talk with you and share my take on this once I'm finished with our talk. So in the Life Archive, it started with me in the sense that I started collecting materials when I was a kid. And over to your left here, how I came to be in this world is through my parents who are seated. My father, Steve J. Fullwood, who was born in Louisiana and raised in Arkansas on a farm and then found his way to Toledo, Ohio, where he met my mother, Elaine Fullwood, the woman holding the flowers, who was born in Toledo, Ohio, which is in northern west part of New York, of the US, near Michigan, Indiana, and so forth. Behind her are her parents, Mary and Jerry. To the left, standing is her sister Margie and her grandmother, Beulah O'Neill Richardson. These people shaped my life. To the right, you see a picture of me when I was 6 years old, and I was given a trophy because I knew how to write in cursive as a kid. I was a reader, a writer, and I was pretty happy about this trophy, as you can tell. But if you notice, if you look beyond me in the trophy, there are things in the house. There are photographs, there's a lamp, there are things that continue to fade in my memory. And when I think of the photographs that exist in our family now, in different, with different people here and there, what have you, as I write about my family and our history, these photographs have become really important for me to reconstruct what it was like growing up in Toledo, Ohio, during the 1970s, during the 80s, when a lot of factories closed down, effectively shutting out a certain segment of Black population who were on their way to middle class, who had been working class to middle class people, as well as the beginning of HIV and AIDS in our community, in addition to crack, in addition to gang. So I graduated in 1984, and all of those things basically came in and began to ravage our communities. Here, I am 6 years old. It is 1972. One more thing before I change the slide is that as a kid, I became interested in genealogy. And I think the archive bug was started in me then because I wanted to collect photographs. I wanted to hear stories about my father growing up on a farm because I was a city kid. I wanted to learn more about our heritage, where we came from, what we did. And this became a lifelong thing for me. And so becoming an archivist was an extension of that. I started out as a children's librarian in Ohio after I graduated undergraduate. After I got my degree at the University of Toledo, became a children's librarian for 3 years, went to school in Atlanta to get my master's, and then moved to New York City to work at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And there is where the In the Life Archive blossomed. And it started with my own collection of materials that I had been collecting for a number of years in Ohio, in Georgia, and then finally New York City. And those materials, those books, those journals, materials from conferences, they saved my life. They gave me a reflection. They gave me something to think about. Growing up in Ohio, basically, I didn't know any gay people, except for when I went out to clubs. And you went out to clubs to socialize, but you really didn't go out to, in some cases, or for the most part, organize or to build organizations or to talk about these things. And so I was more than happy to leave Ohio to find people who shared not just a cultural experience, but just like a mental, a physical, and a spiritual connection. And so the In the Life Archive started with the collection of materials that I had purchased online, not online, but through the mail, stuff that I ordered for bookstores. It was really important to me to read stories, to engage in those stories, and to begin to write my own story down, because it was important for me to reflect on what I had been, what I experienced, what I wanted to experience, and so forth. And what you have here in the archive are materials, evidence of the materials that I, one, collected, but two, started to collect once I came to the Schomburg. The Schomburg was the best place for this archive in context. Now, the Schomburg Center is an institution, but I described the In the Life Archive as a community archive because once I got there, about a year afterwards, I asked my curator at the time, Dinah LeChatinier, a Black Cuban woman who was born in the US in the late 40s, if I could start this archive. She was fine with it because she had wanted to build the collection up in that way. To backtrack a little bit about the Schomburg Center started out with a collection by Arthur Schomburg, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican man born in the late 19th century, who moved to New York City with an amazing collection of materials. Basically, he was told as a kid, there are two stories. He was told as a kid that there was no such thing as Black African culture, or that Africans had not contributed anything to world history. Those apocryphal stories allegedly set him out on a journey to begin collecting books, statuary, all kinds of things related to the African and African diasporic experience. He had collected so much, he filled his house with all this stuff. In 1926, the New York Public Library purchased his collection, and that became the Schomburg Collection. The Schomburg Collection grew and continued to grow from 1926 until 1972, when the collection was designated a research collection at the New York Public Library, which meant it was no longer a part of the regular local libraries. It was a part of a research center. And over time, it continued to grow. And Right now, there are over 15 million items in the collection. These materials are all formats. So they're AV materials, they're manuscript materials, photographic materials, general research and reference materials, mass-produced books, all kinds of forms in terms of microfilm, microfiche, digital archives, just an amazing array of materials. You can find something out about Black people anywhere in the world at the Schomburg Center. I'd recommend, if you ever get to New York City, to go and to call me up if you go. That way I can help you navigate the resources there and introduce you to people. And so coming to the Schomburg in 1998, a year later, when I was asked to start the archive, I was supported because there was already a presence of Black queer people there already. As I mentioned to you earlier, Joseph Beam, the editor of the first Black anthology, his papers were there. And his papers got there because his mother donated his papers. When he passed away suddenly, that was her only child, her friends told her to throw all that stuff away. It was just going to make you sad. What she did do, she didn't do that, obviously. She donated his papers after she moved Essex Hemphill and his cat into her house. And then they finished what would have been Joe's book, his second book together, called Brother to Brother, Writings by New Black Gay Men. And they also had a number of other collections, including Melvin Dixon, who's a poet, interpreter, and professor at Columbia, just a very smart man, and a fiction writer. Asado Saint, a Haitian-born poet, activist, and publisher, had his own imprint called Galileans Press. So Schomburg had been collecting materials long before I got there. It was really, sometimes it takes a person from a particular community to begin an archival initiative to bring more things into the archive. And so I want to talk a little bit about the photographs here. So black and white picture here to your lower right is Essex Hemphill, picture that a friend of mine, Ajamu X, a photographer, a fine arts photographer and activist based in London, took when Essex went over to London to promote his book, but also do a number of readings. And so these are photographs that virtually no one knows about, but Ajamu has them, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him later on in my talk. Above him are some of the materials that are in the archive that I actually had on my desk at one point. Magazines, books, journals from conferences, newsletters. That was sort of like the beginning. That was roughly around the early 2000s. The two women you see here, left to right, Alexis DeVoe, who is a poet, writer, activist, former professor at SUNY Buffalo, and the biographer of Audre Lorde's warrior poet. Amazing thinker, a wonderful reader. And she's hugging her friend, Gwendolyn Hardwick. In the 1970s, they started a theater called the Flamboyant Ladies Theater, where they wrote and produced all of their own work. Those archival materials are, exist in Alexis's papers, which are at the Schomburg Center. And they're actually writing a book right now about their experience. It was a bit slowed down because of the pandemic, but they're still working on it. And I'm hoping to help them with it in terms of doing research for them, but also just, I love this kind of work. I think the archive is constantly giving birth to things. Below them are some of the materials in the Life Archive, which include a number of individual files, which I'll get into in a second, so I can differentiate and give you a lay of the land about what's in the archive itself. So basically what's in the archive, again, it was originally called the Black and Lesbian Archive. We wanted to name it after a person, but we didn't want the name to distract from the archive itself or to be misinterpreted as that person's papers. So that's why we chose In the Life, after Joseph Beam's book, In the Life. So that's the inspiration for that. So a number of the materials are US based, but there are materials from London, there are materials from the Caribbean, as well as even different parts of Africa, most unfortunately, largely materials related to homophobic attacks and so forth in different parts of Africa, specifically the West Africa. And so when you come to the division, you'll see an array of materials on the table here. There are a lot more manuscript materials, personal papers, organizational papers, materials that are rare. There are films, which I'll talk about in a moment, films and videos. There are t-shirts, there are other kinds of materials, buttons, flags. So it's a collection that has an array of materials that represent about, say, from the 1950s in the US on. And that's quite an achievement, but this is what the community did. The community brought this material to us once they found out about the archival initiative. And they became comfortable with doing that because it was at the Schomburg, and the Schomburg Center's name was a trusted one. And it's one of the benefits with working with an institution that does work in the community. I'll talk about that in a second. So something that Heitor had asked me when he first invited me to give this talk was, do I start first with the material, the story, or the person? And for me, it started with the people, because without the people, you don't have the story, you don't have you don't have the narrative, and you don't have the material in some cases. So I actually reached out to folks like Alexis DeVoe, like Cheryl Clark, a writer, a poet, a former professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and a number of other people to see what they had. The reason why the community archive at a public institution is the way that I'm framing the In the Life archive is because, not only because the community built the archive, but because it has that kind of feeling. It's wide reaching in terms of its format and the people in it. There are one of the drawbacks of collecting at the time that I did was that there were so few materials produced by and about people who were bisexual or transgender. Those two communities were just beginning to produce, mass produce things about their lives. You know, someone like Janet Mock or someone, you know, these people weren't active at the time that I was doing the work. So I'm glad that they are, and that there are more people out there who identify other than gay or lesbian, whose work I hope will be collected in an archive like this or some other archive. The development of the archive at the Schomburg was critical because I had access to seasoned professionals who could help guide me in speaking with the community, how to approach the community, how to bring the community in so that we could show them how we keep material, how we make the material, how we preserve it, how we provide access to it, how we catalog it. So those are critical things when you're trying to build community and share with them, this is what we do behind closed doors, because there's a lot of demystification that needs to happen when you're doing work with the community at a public institution. Oftentimes, years ago, a friend of mine told me that she felt that Black and brown people rarely got good service at public institutions, regardless if they were courthouses, libraries, hospitals, you name it. So she set out, one of her goals was to make sure that every person that came in the door knew that they were in the right place, to help them out, to be kind and friendly to them. And I take that with me wherever I go, honestly. So I'm glad that she told me that. When it comes to donors, the In the Life archive, again, because the Schomburg had a name in the street, some people donated, majority of people donated things. They were donating personal records, organizational records, collections of magazines that they had, really important stuff. A few people donated money, where I was able to buy more things for the archive, which I was very happy with. And the apparatus was set up so that the money went into an account and I would spend down the account buying materials. The thought process, as I mentioned earlier, I was working with seasoned archivists and curators who helped me think through what I wanted to do. I had a brochure in the early days of the archive. I had a brochure that I passed out at different events, at Pride events and other Black LGBTQ kinds of events, to kind of like give people something to take, but also just a basic, this is what the archive is about. Contact me if you would like more information. I was also thinking about how best to represent the community in forms like this, to speak directly to people about the archive, why it's important, how you might contribute to it, and also inspire other kinds of archival initiatives that may not be Black or queer, but that they are community-centered largely, and that they provide a bridge from the community to these institutions that sometimes on the surface, on the facade, they look really cold, you know. Sometimes even on the inside, they can be cold as well. there was a belief in the project. So once I came to the Schomburg, there was a belief in the project from my curator, but also my colleagues. They thought it was a good idea, and they would often help me think through and process things related to the archival initiative. And there was nothing like that. So I was never, ever alone in this process, is what I want to say. And the impact of being in a mainstream institution and the cost of doing so is that the institution owns the physical material, but they do not own the copyright. So if you donate something to an institution, oftentimes you'll be given a choice whether or not to give up your copyright or to keep it. And I always encourage people to keep their copyright because they created this material. They wrote those books. And that the institution itself can preserve it and keep it well and provide access to it, but they are the owners of that material, the intellectual property. So I'd recommend that for any kind of archival initiative, that people retain the power. Oftentimes people die, copyrights are lost, and then the library owns it or another institution owns it, and then they end up benefiting from that. It's benefiting from those records in ways that I feel should go to the family. I feel like it should go to a next of kin and so forth. So I'm big on people keeping their copyrights, their intellectual property. Here on this page are a number of, this is a sampling of the kinds of things that are in the collection. Some of the names might be recognizable, most of them probably won't, because Black queer community, the activists, the writers, the politicians, and just the regular folks are largely US based. Many of these people didn't write a book or direct a movie or write a song or produce an album. There were people who were just doing work at organizations, writers and playwrights who might be known in a particular field. And they were kind of the first, they were not just the champions of the In the Life archive, they donated their stuff and they got other people to donate things as well. The organizations like, for example, the Adodi Records. Adodi is a religious or spiritual organization that was exploring sexuality that wasn't Christian based, that wasn't Jewish or Muslim based, but they were thinking more about West Africa and taking their inspiration from West Africa and Ifa, for example. The Gay Men's of African Descent Records. When I first came to New York City, I went to this organization because they had programming. Ended up being friends with the director who wanted, at that point, those records to be in an institution. They were founded, GMAD was founded in 1986 to address the social, health, and political needs of Black gay men. That was 1986, and I kind of came in 1998, and around 2006, the records were donated to the Schomburg through a grant, and because the records were scant in the beginning, the late 80s, we did oral histories with people who were there to talk about what it was like to organize, to collaborate with other people about that time, the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Over to the right here, you have the individual organization subjects, house ballroom scene, erotica and pornography, events, and pride records. These records are, the reason why this is a miscellaneous collection is because they came in and they were organized together based on these subjects. For example, the house ballroom scene, there's one box of material that encompasses 13 houses, some of which were founded in the 70s, and some of which were as late as the 2000s. And these were flyers, brochures, and in some cases, obituaries, which is really something. And so for the most part, to be clear, most people know about Black queer culture through the house ballroom scene, through drag shows. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is really still inside the community. I mean, it's there, but it's not like the like RuPaul's Drag Race or the TV shows Pose and Legendary. These are the mass-produced things. There are some movies and there are some other things, but typically most people associate Black queerness with the house ballroom scene. So there is some representation of it in the archive. In its early years, I want to speak about the Schomburg Center again, because it was combating white supremacy and racism and a number of other things. The Schomburg was collecting materials produced by and about people who had a respectability politic. These were people who were professional. These were people whose lives were supposed to go against the racist idea that Black people didn't do anything anywhere. So the Schomburg started out with those collections, and they were always diasporic. Schomburg himself is an Afro-Puerto Rican man, and so there were a number of collections materials that he collected from the Caribbean, as I mentioned, Africa, basically anywhere where Black people were, this man was collecting this stuff. And he was collecting at a time when Black culture wasn't popular to collect. But capitalism is pretty popular to collect right now, as you might imagine. And so I know that you guys are undertaking a preservation project around film and video, and I want to share a very, very small part of the archive, the In the Life archive, that contains films and videos such as Brother to Brother, Black Kids, Black Ain't, That's My Face, a film by Cheryl, or a couple of films by Cheryl Dunye, one called Watermelon Woman, that I think I'd like to share with you now. But some of the issues with collecting film and video and preserving them involve that a lot of Black queer films, shorts, and documentaries and feature films, they are in short supply. Some of them didn't get distribution. Some of them were only shown once or twice at film festivals. And in some cases, they have a scant information on the internet about them. And so that's very problematic for a lot of reasons, because it's a part of our legacy that we can keep. The Schomburg has an amazing moving image and recorded sound division that is dedicated to preserving this material, making it available to the public. And I'm still from time to time donating things, even though I left there in 2017. I want to share with you.
Steven.
Yes.
Sorry. Como não tem legenda, esse trecho que você vai passar não tem legenda, e talvez nem todo mundo viu Watermelon Women, viu A Mulher Melancia, talvez eu queria gastar tipo um minutinho para poder falar do que é o filme, assim, para poder localizar algumas pessoas, né?
I can totally do it. And so,
thank you.
You want to talk about it, or you would like me to talk about it?
Não, eu posso falar rapidinho, só para a gente poder também alternar e não ficar só você falando.
Okay.
Então, é um filme de 96. A diretora do filme é essa mulher à esquerda, a Cheryl Dunye. Ela é uma trabalhadora de videolocadora. E a história, ela descobre uma atriz lésbica dos anos 30, e a gente vai assistindo esse filme como se fosse a investigação dessa atriz lésbica dos anos 30, né? Conforme a gente vai assistindo esse filme, o que a gente vai percebendo com tudo é que talvez essa atriz nunca tenha existido. Essa atriz per se que a gente está assistindo no filme, ela nunca tenha existido. O que, na verdade, essa trabalhadora de locadora e cineasta vai fazendo, ela vai fabulando, né? Então, na impossibilidade de acessar as vidas das pessoas, você fabula para conseguir tapar esses buracos, né? Tapar esses grandes vazios. Então esse é o plot do filme, e é um dos primeiros filmes que a gente tem aqui no chamado mundo ocidental de representações de mulheres negras lésbicas, né? Não só indivíduos, não só individuais, mas em coletividade, né? Lembrando que no Brasil, quando a gente teve O Amor Maldito, da Adélia Sampaio, é uma diretora negra, cujo filme é protagonizado por duas mulheres brancas, né? Então, ainda nesse momento em que o filme foi realizado, em 1996, a gente ainda está falando de uma certa escassez de imagens negras protagonizadas por mulheres lésbicas. Então, era só uma introdução muito rapidinha, já que esse trecho aqui desse flerte, dessa cena de flerte, não está legendada.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Heitor. So now a clip from Watermelon Woman, directed by Cheryl Dunye.
So who's the cutie? Some customer. She's got a nice bone structure if you're into wet girls. Who do you think she is or isn't in the family? Tamara, why are you always constantly clacking women? We're lesbians, remember, Cheryl? We're into female-to-female attraction. Anyway, you're the one who's supposed to be clocking all the girls. How long has it been since you've been with one, anyway? A week. Remember the emotionally imbalanced Yvette? Ah! Come on, Cheryl, she was not that bad. Besides, she called Stacy last night and she asked about you.
Oh, she was blah. If you two worked as much as you talked, I'd have a chain of video stores by now. Amber, Cheryl, I'd like to introduce you to your coworker, Annie Hinckley.
Heath. Annie Heath.
Yeah, Annie Heath. She's a Bryn Mawr graduate, right?
Right. It's nice to meet you, Cheryl. It's nice to meet you, Tamara.
I'll tell you what, Cheryl, why don't you help Annie learn the Bob system while waiting on this customer?
Okay.
Miss Attitude, in my office. Let's go.
Okay, so I'm taking you up on your suggestion, and it's 2 for 1, right?
Right.
So maybe I should go get the tapes.
No, stay here and we'll do this together.
Okay.
Name on the account?
It's Rolland, but it's a new account.
Okay, new accounts get rung up like any other order, except we have to get her name and address,
Right.
phone number, and I'll get her credit card. Gotcha. Can I have your credit card? Thanks.
All right, so the name is Rolland. What's your first name? Diana, And your address? 4043 Ludlow. And that's your Philly. And your phone number? 555-2112. Okay, that's it. Don't I have to sign something?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
You know, Cheryl, I've worked in a video store before. I mean, I just get the tape she wants and scan them, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm getting Repulsion and Cleopatra
Cleopatra
Jones.
Jones, right.
I'll get them. They're in alphabetical order.
Alphabetical.
Can I have my credit card back?
Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go.
Okay. Yeah. All right, there you go. Thank you.
Would you like a bag?
No, thanks. Cheryl.
You're welcome. And that's how you take a customer order.
You mean that's how a customer picks up an employee? If it's that easy, I need to get a name tag, Cheryl.
May have stopped my PowerPoint. So I'm going to reload it and then begin sharing again. Thank you for your patience. And here we go. So that's one of the first, if not the first, Black lesbian mainstream films. And so let's see, where we at? Hello? Let's see. Actually, a little further back. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of scarcity when it comes to films produced by and about LGBTQ life. A lot of shorts that went to film festivals, as I mentioned, but never seen again. I'm sure Heitor can speak to sometimes when you're putting together a film festival, sometimes you have to reach out to the director directly to get a copy of the film because that might be the only copy in existence. And so if I had more time when I was at the Schomburg, I probably would have spent more time building up this aspect of the collection. But in addition to building the In the Life archive, I was also managing at one point the actual division. So I didn't have a lot of time after I became associate curator, then assistant curator in 2013. There are also videos that cover conferences, like the Queer Studies Conference in Chapel Hill, another short from Cheryl Gunny, and then also over here to the right, top right, we have Walida Hanifa's Black Folks Guide to Black Folks. It's a humorous one-woman show that she put on in the 2000s. That film actually was produced and did have some distribution, as well as The Polymath, or The Life and Opinions of Samuel R. Delany, Gentleman, directed by Fred Barney Taylor. Samuel Delany is a sci-fi writer, a pornography writer, a man of letters, like the most prolific person that I actually know personally. He's sort of like a spiritual godfather to me. We meet, talk, eat breakfast, gossip, read each other's work. Very, very fortunate to have him around. His papers used to be at Boston University. And he was so prolific in the 60s, they would pull up a truck to his apartment in New York City and take out boxes of material. Well, Boston had the material, but wasn't really processing it. So the material is now at Yale University where it's processed, and you can actually go online and see the finding aid to the collection. This man he told me once that for every book he's published, 9 other books weren't published, that he couldn't finish, or they morphed into other books. It's a good documentary about it. Early on when I was speaking with Heitor about specifically what kinds of choices did I make related to putting materials in the archive. Do I focus on the person? Do I focus on the format? Do I focus on the narrative, the story? It was important for me to think through the lives of Black queer people. And so part of that is the erotica is a part of who we are, right? As a people, everyone. It shapes who we think we are, who we want to be with, and how we value each other and ourselves. And as queer people, we're often thought about what we do. We're often reduced to what we do in the bedroom or in the park or elsewhere. And so part of our education has been through erotica and pornography. I think that Black people have been and continue to be commodified, their bodies commodified as pathological, as sexual, as bodies that don't matter as much as white bodies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's important for me to document that commodification so that, one, it's a part of our learned heritage in learning in some way simply about sex between 2 men, sex between 2 women, sex between trans people, and so forth. Pornography has been a teacher in ways that we don't get that education in our schools or from our families and so forth. This is information that is quiet, even now. You still don't really talk about, even though there are a lot more Black queer folks, or just even queer folks in the mainstream, there's still a lack of information. But a lot of people find out about sex on the internet. And so prior to the internet, there were all these magazines that were produced mostly by white men for the white male gaze. And these magazines are representative of that. Of the 2-3 dozen titles that I've collected over the years that are in the erotica and pornography part of the In the Life collection, you'll see again that these are produced by white men. So even though Black men were reading them and sharing them and all of that, they weren't for white, they were for white consumption. And over the years, there have been more magazines and films that were produced by Black and Latin people, pornography films, or erotica rather, pornography and erotica. This is the general sense is that Black bodies, again, are used are commodified for white consumption. And it was important for me, as I mentioned earlier, after talking with friends of mine and other people kind of thinking about it, pornography and erotica made up a big part of how we understood and learned sex. What, particularly about penises, big time. And so I wanted it there as nothing exists in a vacuum. So there's a context of the Schomburg Center, which Black materials all over the world exist. And then there's the Black Queer Archive. And then you have pornography, which is the subject in it. And it tells you something about those individual stories, which is really important to me. This is something I just wanted to ask if anyone knew where the Audre Lorde papers were, if there were people who had done some research online to find out a little bit more about this particular poet, essayist, writer's work. And it's important that she comes after Black pornography because she wrote an essay, The Erotic as Power, one of her books of essays. I think it was in Sister Outsider. And she said some really important things about how the erotic is a place of empowerment and useful when it's not being forced upon you. So I'd recommend you reading that essay. Joan Jett Black. Joan Jett Black is one of my favorite people of all times because she is the only Black drag queen, or the only drag queen, period, to run for president of the United States. She did this in 1992. She was a part of a group called ACT UP, and they asked her to run for mayor in Chicago, and then she ends up running for the president. The archive at the Schomburg for Joan Jett Black includes articles, flyers, and other things that kind of talk about her campaign, as well as 2 films, Lick Bush, 92, and Dragging for Votes. These films were directed and produced by Elspeth Kidd, a friend of mine who passed away in 2012, and Gabriel Gomez. They were both going to Northwestern at the time. So I want to share very briefly a little bit about Joan Jett, and to set this up, this is Terrence Allen Smith, who Joan Jett Black is his persona, his drag persona. And in 2019, Terrence McCrae, Alan McCrae, actually put on a show in Chicago called Miss Black for President. And so this is like almost 35 years after he ran for president in 1992. So here's a bit of that.
The only thing I can say is that it's me turned up a lot. It's not really much different because I didn't change my voice or anything. And yeah, Joan is not really different. It's just amplified. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. The first time I did, well, as Joan was at an ACT UP demonstration. And it was more of a fashion model kind of thing. I was a nurse, I think. Because we had a huge ACT UP demonstration at Cook County Hospital, an all-night thing. I had done drag before in the 70s, and I've been in a few plays. Then I got involved with Queer Nation and ACT. I was one of the 5 people who called the first Queer Nation meeting here in Chicago. When the mayoral race came up, somebody said we should run something. And they asked me if I would do it. Well, sure, of course I'd do that. And it turned out to be an interesting thing because the media loved it because no one ran against Rich Daley, and certainly not a drag queen. And then when the 92 came up, we were like, well, why not run for president, Next thing I knew, I was running. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really enjoyed showing people that, because my thing was, they told us that anybody could be president of the United States, anybody. So we were taking that and running with it. I realized that the gay people that went before me made it possible for me to come out, and our generation makes it possible for the next generation to come out. I was told that a couple times today. It's a wonderful thing to hear that the things that you did made it easier for other people. I really wasn't prepared for people to get it the way that it has been, like the way that Tina and Terrell got, you know, and the script is amazing, and the people that are in it are amazing, and it's gonna be pretty powerful, I think. It's just very moving. I can't pinpoint that enough, because I would never imagine that I'd be sitting in a room with people doing a play about you know, about me. It's just quite a mind fuck. It's quite a mind, you know.
I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the community in which I work. I work with other archivists, academics, activists, writers, and just regular folks who are doing the work of archivists, who are either on this side of it, collecting materials, preserving those materials, and then academics and other people who are using those materials to create our histories. The two people in this picture here, Gloria Joseph, Audre Lorde's widow, who recently passed away, who was an academic writer and educator and activist, who came to the conference, the Writers' Conference, the Fire and Ink Conference in 2015, to talk about a book that she had just written. And then the wonderful Randall Keenan, who was a fiction author, a fictionist, editor, short story writer, and professor at Chapel Hill for a number of years, whose book really, his first book was called A Visitation of Spirits. And it blew my mind. I was so happy to have it. Living in Ohio, a story about a Black queer man. And it was a dreamy, thoughtful, engaging fiction piece that I'd recommend anyone take a look at. We lost both of them within the span of 2 years, these Black gay elders. Fortunately, Gloria Joseph's papers will be saved, I believe, by Spelman College, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And Randall Keenan's papers, I believe, are going to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm still hoping that that's the case. And if they don't go to those institutions, I hope the archives end up somewhere. It's important that these people are doing the work in our communities for a number of years. Sometimes nothing is done with their archive, they just disappear. And it's always painful for me. And I think it's a great loss to our community and the world's community. I mentioned earlier I was in contact with a man named Majamu X, who fine art photographer and archivist who lives in London. He coordinated an archive called the Ruckus Archive, which basically covers about 40 to 50 years of Black queer activism and performance in London, in the London-based area. The archive is at the London Metropolitan Archives. He reached out to me in 2000, I believe, 2000, via email to tell me that he had learned about the archive and that he would like to talk. And so I was really happy. And for the next 20 plus years, we've been hosting each other when we travel. I've come to his house, he's hosting me at his house. I'm going to Paris in a week, and I'm going to jump over to London because we're working on a book project together. Ajamu is the kind of person who he lived in Huddersfield and he moved to London in the late 1980s for a conference. He moved there, actually went there for a conference, ended up moving there because he was a part of a burgeoning Black queer consciousness there, of writers, activists, people who were building organizations, just amazing people. For the better part, since the late 1980s, he's been documenting London's community. He took the picture of Essex Hemphill that I showed at the very beginning of my PowerPoint. Just a dynamic person and someone I'm looking forward to working with again for the rest of my life, because I appreciate the artist and the archivist. And so there's ajamu-studio.com. You can learn a little bit more about his work there. He's been doing a lot of both local but international work documenting the Black queer experience. I want to mention to you Shanta Smith, who is a wonderful archivist in and of herself. She works at NYU as a dean, but she's also worked with the Lesbian Her Story Archive, which is in Brooklyn, New York. and she's helped to organize collections and do other things. The Lesbian Her Story Archives was founded in 1973. It is one of the largest community-owned archive in existence. They take no money from the government. They're not beholden to anyone other than themselves. They raise their own money. It's volunteer run, and they have a wonderful house in Brooklyn where they preserve the collections and they make them available to the public. What Shanta has done over the years is not only produce collections, process collections, but she's also created zines for the public so they better understand an institution or a collection. And one of them is right over here, the Lesbian Her Story Archives, and she focuses on Black lesbians in the 70s and before, which is awesome because there are a lot of collections there for that. Jafari S. Allen is an academic, a professor, and activist who used the In the Life archive to create his book, There's a Disco Ball Between Us, A Theory of Black Gay Life. It's an amazing book where he focuses on what he calls the long 80s. The long 80s are 1979, when one of the first Black queer organizations was organized, the National Coalition of Black Gays and Lesbians, to 1995, which is the Black Nations Queer Nations Conference. And that was a critical watershed moment where a lot of folks came together in New York City, academics, activists, other kinds of people in the community. It was diasporic. There were people from the Caribbean as well as Africa speaking about their experiences. There's a film about it. I'd recommend if you have an opportunity to see it, it's really great. And Jafari is interested in working with Brazilians and possibly bringing Black nations, queer nations to some aspect, some city in Brazil. I told him I knew a couple people and I connect you guys. So that's something I'll be doing shortly. Christopher Stalling is another archivist who worked with me on the In the Life archive at the Schomburg Center. He is a Harlem resident, Harlem born and bred, awesome guy, has started his own oral history and podcast called In the Life 2.0. More information, everybodyneedsawitness.com, or you can find him on social media, Facebook and Instagram at In the Life 2.0. Great project. He's been building up his archive for the last couple of years and throughout the pandemic as well. Very dynamic man. I'd recommend you to have a listen to some of those archives. Miranda Mims is the co-founder of the Nomadic Archivists Project, which is what I mentioned to you earlier. It's a project where we work with organizations and people, specifically people of African descent, to archive their material. It could be as simple as, how do I preserve my grandmother's picture, to working with the National Black Theater to, for over 50 years, help them manage their archives and think about it. She also owns her own company called Symmetry of Space. Miranda can come into your house and she can organize anything. She can throw everything up in the air and it'll come down organized the way you want it. She's really dynamic and great. As a friend of mine, and the reason why we started the Nomadic Archivists Project is because we love doing the work at Schomburg, but we wanted to be nomadic. We wanted to go to different places and do different things related to being of use to our Black communities, whether they're national or international. I'll talk about the Nomadic Archivists Project briefly. It was founded in 2018. And over the years we have a podcast called In the Telling, with 3 seasons in, and basically we're talking about the global Black family experience. So people come on and talk about a family experience that they had. This first season were a lot of friends that we knew. The second season, we went international, folks from Ghana, Brazil, and other places where the folks have settled. And then the third season, we had Black genealogists come in and talk about what they do and why they got involved in Black genealogy. We also have a scholarship. So every year we give out a scholarship, we raise the money for it. And then the people who are eligible to apply for it are people who are either in library school or independent archivists. There's a gentleman in Ghana right now who won the scholarship last year, who goes from community to community, taking, with the community's permission, taking digital photographs of materials, interviewing the people in the communities. Right now, he's setting up an archive, which is really awesome. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the exhibition coordinator for Marking Time, as well as the lead archivist for archiving Marking Time. The book Marking Time focuses on artists who are formerly and currently incarcerated. Nicole Fleetwood, the book won the it was the National Book Award. She took 10 years plus to write about her own family and then became aware of this amazing community of artists. And as a result of the book, the exhibition was born, and I've been working with her since 2021 to platform formerly and currently incarcerated artists, as well as artists who focus on the impact of mass incarceration on Black and poor communities. See, there's some of the artwork here that you see here that's in the show right now. We're actually at Brown University until December 18th. And as a part of the project, a Mellon project, sponsor project we recently received, Miranda and I are working on archiving Marking Time, where we work with artists and organizations associated with associated with Marking Time. So we're working with them to archive their material. Oftentimes with artists, you're busily creating things and you're trying to get seen and shown. And so right now we're hoping to build an archival consciousness by consulting with people one-on-one or in groups to archive their materials. Very briefly, when I asked you earlier about archiving yourself, it wasn't a question for me because I knew that I was I was the genealogist for the family, unofficial, and that I had things related to our family's records. And I was also at one point a publisher, a person who worked in the art community by co-hosting an archive in our art salon in our house. And so I began organizing the stuff. So I'd be at work organizing stuff, I come home organize stuff. It was important to me. So I think that if you take anything from this talk, is that we all have stories to tell and we all have some responsibility to tell that story in some manner, shape, or form. This is one of the ways in which I'm telling my story. So I have personal papers, professional records. I published a couple of books, edited a few books, and so I have my writings published and unpublished, and then the research records for things that I'd like to do in the future that kind of give you a sense of my interest overall. And so what you see in the picture over there, that's 1/4 of what I have in the house. So I have 2 more of those and a closet full of boxes of materials that are organized. I'm 56 years old. I have a lot of stuff. Let me go back here. Essex Film Waste and Jones collection. There is a material at the Schomburg Center donated by Waste and Jones, who perform with the poet Essex Phil. There is a Tongues Untied script. This is one of the first movies by Marlon Riggs. And it's an annotated script where he marks up the script, Essex does, for the parts that they actually perform in the documentary. Very important. As you guys build out your film collection, I'm not sure if you guys are collecting scripts and other things related to the films themselves. I'm collecting that stuff, or was collecting the stuff for the Schomburg Center. Here is an excerpt from Tongues Untied, directed by Marlon Riggs. And just want to share this with you very briefly.
We sit silently, sometimes join in the laughter, as if deep down we too believe we are the lowest among the low. No one will redeem your name, your love, your life, your manhood, but you. No one will save you but you. Your silence is constant. Your silence is suicide.
These strong role models, man. You can't have cats looking up to guys in the game. I don't know what it is to be a man. Sodomy is sin, and you know the rage of sin is the rage of sin is
I know the anger that lies inside me, like I know the beat of my heart and the taste of my spit. It is easier to be angry than to hurt. Anger is what I do best. It is easier to be furious than to be yearning, easier to crucify myself and you than to take on the threatening universe of whiteness by admitting we are worth wanting each other.
I too know anger. My body contains as much anger as water. It is the material from which I have built my house, blood-red bricks that cry in the rain. It is the face and posture I show the world. It is the way, sometimes the only way I am granted audience. It is sometimes the way I show affection. I am angry because of the treatment I am afforded as a Black man. That fiery anger is stoked additionally with the fuels of contempt and despisal shown me by my community because I am gay. I cannot go home as who I am.
When I speak of home, I mean not only the familial constellation from which I grew, but the entire Black community, the Black press, the Black church, Black academicians, the Black literati, and the Black left. Where is my reflection? I am most often rendered invisible, perceived as a threat to the family, or I am tolerated if I am silent and inconspicuous.
This clip is available on YouTube, and I recommend you watch the rest of it. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk. Let me just... One last trivia question, Black queer trivia. Where are James Baldwin's papers housed? What institution owns the physical rights to James Baldwin's papers? I'll end up with a quote with Toni Morrison, which for me is also a beacon, a person who guided my own writing, but also my sensibility around archives. And so I'll say this. Narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment it is being created. We will not blame you if your reach exceeds your grasp. If love so ignites your words, they go down in flames and nothing is left but scald. Or if, with the reticence of a surgeon's hands, your words suture only the places where blood might flow, we know that you can never do it properly, once and for all. Passion is never enough. Neither is skill, but try. And this is an excerpt from the Nobel lecture in 1993. I like taking the first part of what she gave us here and to really kind of think about what the archive is. The archive is radical, creating us at the very moment it's being created. Our job is to make meaning where we are, not to always be responding to white supremacy, to talk to each other and back to each other, to imagine that archives that haven't been created yet, ones that are waiting for us in the ether, and to understand that this whole archival project is just the beginning. That there are many ways, a schizoanalysis to begin to enter how we can begin to save our stories so that we're responsible to the generations coming behind us and to the ones in front of us. I want to thank you so, so very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today briefly about the work that I do. I hope I spoke slowly enough. And now I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this project and what you're doing. Thank you.
Menino, a gente que te agradece. Peraí, deixa eu me ajeitar aqui. Agradece você, agradece... Gente, eu estou aqui meio emocionado, com 1 zilhão de notas e segurando o meu caderninho. E vi que tem uma pergunta no chat. Reforço que tem espaço está aberto.
Sure.
Gente. Eu vou fazer essa pergunta daqui a pouquinho. Mas queria dizer algumas coisas a partir do que o Steve trouxe, né? Que é, primeiro, Steve, eu queria te pedir, esse favor de, por gentileza, você compartilhar depois, no futuro, quando acabar esse curso, a penúltima página do slide, que é quando você traz uma definição radical de arquivo. eu acho que aquela página, você começa a sua apresentação falando que o arquivo pode ser um lugar para a imaginação, né? Acho essa uma definição muito boa, uma definição muito potente, nada técnica e muito sensível e muito política e muito acessível, muito palpável. Então, como a gente está construindo um Google Drive comum para todo mundo, só essa última página, acho que é uma página de muita inspiração, assim. Você colocou... Desculpa, correto. Essa. Exatamente. Acho que aqui tem alguns... Hold that on, please. Aqui tem umas coisas bonitinhas, né, gente? Então, primeiro, pensar o arquivo como algo em constante criação, né? Porque o arquivo ele é radical, ele nos cria no mesmo momento em que está sendo criado, então tem uma relação aí, não? Volta para lá, bebê. Aquela, isso, essa mesmo. Obrigado. É muito importante pensar, como a gente tem sempre pensado a questão da preservação e racializando a prática da preservação, né? Então, esse terceiro ponto, né? Não ficar sempre, não estar sempre respondendo à supremacia branca, né? Porque isso significa que a gente está sempre reagindo e a gente não está conseguindo necessariamente propor e a gente não está conseguindo descentralizar o branco, a brancura e a branquitude. Então, acho muito, muito bonito isso, mas especialmente esse penúltimo ponto, né? Que é imaginar os arquivos que ainda não foram criados, aqueles arquivos que ainda estão esperando por nós no etéreo. Para mim, a preservação é uma prática que vai muito além de quem de fato trabalha especificamente com isso. A gente viu isso na última aula, né? Então, esse último ponto aqui de imaginar os arquivos, né? Começar imaginando os arquivos de nós mesmos, os arquivos de quem está perto da gente. Só reforçar essa coisa de novo aqui próxima de nós. A gente tem uma pergunta no chat, mas antes de eu fazer essa pergunta, eu quero fazer algumas perguntas para o Steven, mas também perguntar o seguinte. No começo, o Steven deixou uma perguntinha para a gente, eu não sei se vocês anotaram, né? E a perguntinha era, por que é importante se arquivar, né? Ou se registrar? Eu acho que talvez a gente podia começar, Steven, essa é a minha proposta, a gente começar talvez tentar, algumas de nós, tentar responder essa pergunta, talvez, por que é importante nos registrar ou nos arquivar? Então, eu estou aqui de host, eu não quero monopolizar a fala, então eu tenho as minhas respostas, que eu escrevi logo na hora. Depois da aula do Steven, eu tenho outras respostas, mas eu quero guardar aquelas lá, mais espontâneas. Mas eu não quero monopolizar a palavra. Então, eu queria começar com vocês, assim. Então, eu vou aqui chamar aleatoriamente. Vou pegar quem está aqui com a câmera aberta. Então, começar contigo, Juliana. Você topa dividir com a gente o que você responderia do porquê que é importante nos arquivar e nos registrar? 3 razões?
É difícil assim, do nada. Não estava preparada para isso. Eu consigo pensar em uma razão agora, assim, que eu acho que é me conhecer, assim, também, né? Esse autoconhecimento. Eu acho que quando eu penso no que eu quero arquivar, né? No que eu quero guardar, eu penso também no que é importante para mim, né? De ser registrado. E eu acho que isso tem a ver com como eu me vejo e como eu quero me conhecer, assim. Não sei.
Obrigado para quem foi pega de surpresa. Tá ótimo. Tá ótimo. Autoconhecimento e definir o que é importante, né? Malu, quer falar com a gente? Quais seriam as suas 3 razões?
Dá para me ouvir?
Dá sim.
Nossa, eu achei essa pergunta um pouco intimidadora, assim. Eu acho que eu vou dar uma resposta assim na lata, ainda estou elaborando, pensando a respeito disso, mas eu acho que é importante porque acho que é importante se arquivar porque sempre terão outros semelhantes a mim. E o processo de identificação é fundamental na nossa existência, assim, e na nossa luta por existir, e, enfim, acho que essas coisas estão relacionadas.
Gente, mas vocês estão afiados, né? Para quem está assim, não elaborei ainda, estou aqui elaborando, está todo mundo elaboradíssimo. Pedro Henrique, que está aí com as melhores luzes, o melhor background da história de uma aula no Zoom, né? Com essa luzinha azul que fica trocando várias vezes. Você está escutando a gente? Quer dividir com a gente? Abre o microfone.
Alô, tá me ouvindo?
Opa, tamo ouvindo, diga aí.
Que bom, maravilhoso. Eu também não elaborei, mas eu acho que é interessante a gente pensar em arquivar, né? Porque constantemente os brancos e o racismo, eles tentam roubar a nossa história, eles tentam fazer tudo que nós fizemos sumir, tudo que... Só voltando, eu acho que o Steven, quando no começo, ele falou que era muito difícil acessar, né, e ir atrás desses arquivos de negros e negras, e eu sinto que é assim até hoje. Eu estudei pouquíssimo no ensino médio e no fundamental sobre a história dos negros, eu só fui aprender com a minha mãe e depois falando com pessoas que entendiam, que eram especializadas nesse assunto, então eu acho que por isso é extremamente importante a gente arquivar nossa história, nossa família, né? E deixar nossa marca agora no Brasil de que, sim, os negros fazem conteúdo, fazem cultura e fazem várias coisas, né? A gente não é esse povo que os brancos têm pensado.
Nós não somos um povo sem história, né? Somos um povo com história e quem escutou o Projeto Quirino ver, por exemplo, a riqueza dessa história, né? O podcast Projeto Quirino. Depois eu te explico o que é o Projeto Quirino, ou Steven, uma das grandes criações acerca de história e memória dos tempos contemporâneos. A Ingrid abriu a câmera, então quem abriu a câmera já está assim, tipo, animadinho para falar. Então chega aí, Ingrid, 3 razões do porquê que é importante se registrar, se arquivar.
Oi, tudo bem? É engraçado porque eu escrevi aqui uma coisa muito parecida com o que o Pedro Henrique falou, que eu tinha colocado que é para a gente ir contra a estrutura vigente que apaga, né? Então, acho que fazer esse processo de guardar a memória e criar memórias, né, é importante para isso e também para a gente não sabe o dia de amanhã, né? Então, eu imagino que as pessoas de antes não imaginavam que ia ter esse monte de gente reunida numa sala de Zoom falando sobre outras coisas, né? Então, vai que ajuda alguém no futuro, né? Acho que sempre tem essa possibilidade de ajudar alguém no futuro. E melhor ainda se forem nossos semelhantes, né?
Já vi que a Flávia abriu a câmera, vou registrar aqui a fala da Vanessa e vou terminar essa primeira rodada com a Flávia para a gente poder também avançar em outros pontos, né? Nunca imaginei que a frase tão brasileira que é a gente não sabe o dia de amanhã fosse entrar aqui numa oficina de preservação. Porque geralmente essa frase, Steven, ela é dita num outro contexto, assim, então é muito particular, essa frase está entrando aqui, assim, né? Ela é dita num contexto mais reativo, né? Preciso me proteger, porque eu não sei o que virá, né? A Vanessa colocou aqui no chat, depois eu vou abrir para você, Flávia, que eu vi que você abriu a câmera, né? Uma razão seria preservar nossa memória e história para nossos descendentes, se identificar e se empoderar do imaginário pessoal e familiar. Então temos aqui outras razões também. Então, Flávia, pega esse último gancho, aí depois eu falo as minhas e a gente vai escutar o Steven.
Tá? Eu acho que eu preciso escrever minha história do jeito que eu me reconheço. Isso é muito importante, porque as pessoas olham para mim, escrevem uma história sobre mim que não necessariamente vai refletir o que eu sou. E eu produzo coisas, né? Eu estudo artes visuais e produzo e escrevo. Então, eu acho que eu tenho que contar minha história, porque minha história é importante para as pessoas que a veem, assim. Outras pessoas pretas, outras mulheres lésbicas precisam saber que eu existi e que eu sou atuante na sociedade.
É curioso, né? Eu sinto que a gente compartilha bastante ali um caldeirão dos porquês, assim. As respostas, elas são muito adjacentes, né? As minhas 3 razões, e aí depois eu devolvo a palavra para você, querido Steven. tá, achei aqui. Eu tinha anotado no papel, lá no começo. Então, razão 1 é porque eu existi, razão 2 porque eu fiz, e a razão 3 é porque eu estive em comunidade. Então, essas seriam as minhas 3 razões do porquê que eu me arquivo. Steven, você gostaria de comentar essas respostas que a gente recebeu?
Those were great answers. And I want you to consider something. I'm just going to show you something. So everyone see, this is my phone. How many of you have a phone? How many of you take photographs all the time? You guys are archivists. You're archiving your experience through a visual medium. You're also, if you have text and you're texting people, you're also archiving your text as you go. And some of the things that we do instinctively, saving things that we think might have historical, that might be important to us later. So we'll just go personal and then we'll go historical, right? You want to save this letter from your grandmother. You want to save a paper that you wrote because you might want to look at it later. The archival impulse, I think, arrives in our hearts, in our brains, in similar ways when we live in a culture where we're defined a lot versus doing the defining. That's on that level. But we define ourselves all the time outside of that particular white gaze. And so for me, I'm so happy that you guys said that. For me, archiving is self-respect. Archiving yourself is a form of self-respect, that you're interested in your own story. I tell people that I'm a time traveler. I've been to the future, and I know someone is looking for you. What are you going to do? How are you going to leave a trail for them to find you? Will it be simply photographs, digital photographs? Will it be writing? How will you tell your story first to yourself and then to that person looking for you in the future?
Que bonito. Você falou sobre respeito próprio, né? Aqui em português talvez a gente poderia falar de amor próprio, né? A gente falou tanto sobre dignidade, né, gente, na primeira aula, tanto sobre dignidade, então acho muito bonito a gente reencontrar a palavra respeito próprio, amor próprio, né? Steven, eu tenho uma pergunta que é, bem, nesse trechinho do Línguas Desatadas que você mostrou, né, a gente está escutando sobre o sentido de voltar para casa, né? E aí casa no sentido mais figurado, essa casa poderia ser, por exemplo, a comunidade negra, né? E aí o narrador fala Onde está o meu reflexo? Eu sou visto como invisível. E aí, como uma pessoa aqui na condição também de um homem negro gay que trabalha com matéria negra e que, por exemplo, programa um festival negro, na ânsia de reagir à supremacia branca, a gente repete hierarquizações, né? Então, quais histórias negras nós vamos contar? De quais grupos negros, dessa grande coisa chamada comunidade negra, quais grupos vamos priorizar? Então, a forma em que as pessoas são minorizadas na sociedade são refletidas nesses espaços. Por exemplo, um protagonismo masculino, um protagonismo cisgênero e um protagonismo heterossexual. E aí, você falou rapidamente sobre os porquês de colecionar material erótico ou pornográfico. E aí você falou os porquês, você contou como a pornografia ensina, etc. Eu gostaria de saber, como era literalmente, ou como é, para as pessoas doarem esses materiais, do tipo, eu chego aqui com a minha coleção de Latin, como chama a revista? Latin Noche, alguma coisa, or Black Inches. Então eu chego ali com a minha coleção de Black Inches e aí eu falo, oi, eu vim doar aqui um arquivinho, entendeu? É um arquivo de putaria. Então, enfim, eu tô levando para piada, mas a pergunta é séria, assim. Como as pessoas chegavam para doar. 2, foi sempre ponto pacífico coletar esses materiais que fogem à política da respeitabilidade?
Very good question. So I'll start with those magazines came in as a part of like a lost collection. Like the material showed up in boxes and we were going through it and, you know, pulling out the stuff that was respectable, flyers, dance, brochures and blah, blah, blah. But then you had all this porn, right? And I remember going through it and going, let me go through this carefully because I know, one, that the Schomburg Center and New York Public Library, the larger entity, collects erotica and pornography, one. Secondly, again, I was thinking about the conversations I've had with other people about how they learned about their sexuality. And it was largely through pornography, largely through print magazines. So that's really the basis for me collecting the material in terms of pulling it in. I had material of my own that I donated from my own personal collection. For people who are interested in donating erotica or pornography to an archival collection, they first need to know, one, does that institution collect it? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm sorry, I have a cat that's knocking stuff over because that's what cats do. Know first what the institution's collection development policies are. That's the first thing. If in fact they do collect pornography, then you want to speak with the curator about what they have already, because they might already have what it is that you're interested in donating. So you'll need to know, one, if they collect it, and two, if they already have it. It's always good to do research about that institution and to talk with a librarian or an archivist about what they collect. Really important. So that's the basics of it. When it comes to a politics of respectability institution, if the institution is set up to respond to white supremacy or white misanthropy as, look at all the wonderful things we've done for the community. We did this, we wrote all these books, created institutions, blah, blah, blah. It's unlikely that they'll be collecting pornography because they're responding to a version of themselves that doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? They're responding to Black pathology. They're not responding to the thing that I'm working on, my friends are working on. We're trying to expand and be more representative of our communities, have our collections reflect that. If you work for a Black institution that's whose collection sensibility is around proving that they have a right to exist, it's unlikely that they will collect erotica and pornography because their roads are pretty narrow in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. My take.
Obrigado. Ponto importante. Vou fazer só uma colocação sobre isso e já vou ler a pergunta aqui da Vanessa. Ano passado, eu fui curador de uma retrospectiva que eu intitulei Insurreição, uma retrospectiva aqui que nós do Nicho 54 fizemos, né? E a insurreição ela estava organizada ao redor dessa ideia de pessoas negras existindo ao longo da história. E aí sim eu usei uma isca, né? Como curador, como programador, muitas vezes a gente usa isca, né? Que é trabalhar nesse certo chavão aí do que é uma expectativa de resistência, né? Como um filme de resistência se parece. Então abri com um filme como Nation Time, do William Greaves, que é um filme sobre um congresso político negro que aconteceu. A sessão seguinte era de um filme chamado Shakedown. E o Shakedown é um filme, um documentário, sobre uma boate lésbica nada politicamente respeitável, assim, daqueles lugares cheios de nuances, daqueles lugares que o debate não é fácil de fazer. E o desejo de passar para esse filme, logo em seguida, era duas coisas, assim. Deslocar a forma que a gente entende resistência, descentralizando a cis-heteronormatividade. 2, enviadecer e sapatonizar essa coisa que a gente chama história negra, porque geralmente essa coisa, as nossas experiências estão como um capítulo à parte, como se não fossem constitutivo da experiência. Então eu estou trazendo esses exemplos para colar com o que o Steven está falando e para pensar cada um nos nossos trabalhos, né? Eu estou falando a partir do meu lugar de curador, como a gente não repete essas visões e essas narrativas e essas percepções engessadas de comunidade negra, de ser preto, de representação preta. Isso é um lugar onde eu tenho muito engajamento, então por isso que eu estou aqui batendo nessa tecla. É o meu momento pastor, tá, gente? Eu sou uma mistura de curador, pesquisador e pastor. A gente tem uma pergunta aqui no chat que eu queria trazer para o Steven, né? Acho que essa pergunta, inclusive, reflete algumas das coisas que a gente trabalhou na primeira aula, né? Da Vanessa. A Vanessa diz, eu tenho uma questão, eu tenho uma pergunta. No Brasil, não me parece tão comum para as famílias negras, perdão, para as famílias pobres dos anos 60, 70 e 80, ter acesso a câmeras. Eu tenho pouquíssimas fotos da minha infância. E a Vanessa diz que nasceu em 1985. E ela não conhece o rosto dos seus avós. As câmeras nos Estados Unidos, elas eram mais baratas? Essa é a pergunta da Vanessa, para pensar uma certa quantidade bastante maior de imagens de arquivo negras que a gente parece ter nos Estados Unidos comparado com o Brasil. Vou falar de percepção por enquanto. Tá aí a pergunta, Steven.
Thank you for that question, and thank you, Vanessa, for asking that question. When it comes to photography in the Black community, there's a film called Through the Lens Darkly by Thomas Allen Harris and produced partially by Deborah Willis, who is the foremost authority on Black photography in the world. She worked at the Schomburg at one point, the Smithsonian, and now she's at New York University. In the film, the most photographed man in America at one point was Frederick Douglass, because he understood the power of the image. And they take it from there, and they have a number of conversations with different photographers over the years, Black photographers, about their work and what they're trying to do. One of the things that I learned was that after World War II, cameras became ubiquitous. They were cheaper, they were more cheaply made, more people could have access to them. I think the reason why I have as many photographs as I do of my family was because they had access to those things. They could afford to. I know men and women who virtually have no pictures of themselves as children. They don't know their grandparents. But I'll say this, Vanessa, and I hope it comes true for you, that for years, my name is Stephen, and my father's name is Stephen, and my grandfather's name is Stephen, so I'm the fourth Stephen. For years, I only knew what my grandfather looked like. And it was, a couple pictures here and there. Never saw my great-grandfather. Some extended family members actually had photographs. And miraculously, their second house out of 3 houses burned down and destroyed a lot of that stuff. But what were they able to do was to reconstruct part of their photographic archive because other people had photographs. And so when I finally saw my great-grandfather, in fact, it's right here with his second wife, Annie. It's hard to see.
Traz para perto, traz para perto.
Mm-hmm.
Obrigado, agora deu.
So
Obrigado.
That's my grandfather and his second wife, Annie. I wanted to cry because I felt like I was connecting with him through that visual medium. Heitor mentioned something earlier to me, and I was hoping to include it in the talk about ancestry. I think genealogy obviously focuses on ancestry and whatever we can pull together, the photographs, the birth and death certificates, the letters or other kinds of materials produced by our ancestors. These things mean more to me than anything. And so I'd recommend, Vanessa, if it's applicable to your experience, to begin to reach out to extended family members who actually might have some of those photographs in their collections. Maybe it's worth a shot. And then I'm not sure how Brazil keeps its records as they relate to driving records or other kinds of state records that might have photographs attached to government documents. That's another way to kind of research genealogy. Those kinds of things might exist. And so school records that might have photographs as well. These are, again, just could be long shots, but they also could turn up records that you, that might be surprising.
Como de nada, como gente,
depois
depois que o Steven fala, eu estou sempre dando um tempinho a mais por causa dos tradutores que fazem esse trabalho hercúleo, né? Maravilhoso, que é deixar a gente conectado, né? Então, inclusive, já aproveitar e dar o crédito, né? Quem está aqui com a gente hoje, fazendo a tradução, é o Henrique Cotrim, que já esteve em algumas iniciativas aqui do Nicho 54, como tradutor simultâneo, e também a Beatriz Veloso, são esses profissionais que estão aqui com a gente, nos colocando em contato com o Steven. Sobre esse ponto, né, Steven, de esse how-to, esse guia aí que ele deu, de como a gente pode chegar por linhas tortas às imagens dos nossos antepassados, a gente falou um pouco sobre isso, né? Na primeira aula, muitos de nós falamos, a única foto que eu tenho do meu avô, da minha avó, enfim, carteira de trabalho. Então a gente conversou um pouco sobre como uma demanda externa, e geralmente uma demanda de documento, uma demanda de respeito, inclusive, é um dos poucos registros que existem dos nossos antepassados. O chat continua aberto para perguntas, ou aqui quem quiser fazer na câmera. Enquanto isso, eu vou fazer uma, que é bem capciosa. Vamos ver se a gente... Se faz sentido, Steven. No Brasil, quando a gente vai pensar um recorte LGBTQ a mais para arquivos, Não, vou falar só de memória, não só de arquivos, de memórias. Quando a gente vai pensar um recorte dessa comunidade para memórias, a gente tem uma questão que é um protagonismo dos homens gays, né? Tanto que aqui a gente criou a expressão, né? A gíria GGGGGG, em vez de ser LGBTQIAP+, e não tem nem mais, não tem nem mais, né? É um minus, na verdade, é um menos. Então, duas perguntas. Sobre o In The Life, a gente consegue ter uma noção de quanto desses materiais proporcionalmente representam vidas masculinas ou histórias masculinas e quanto representam vidas e histórias de mulheres? Essa é uma pergunta. E a segunda pergunta é: existe alguma diferença dos tipos de materiais relativos à história das mulheres e à história dos homens dentro do arquivo In The Life? Essas são as duas perguntas.
These are great questions. Those are great questions. So the first question, it's roughly, In the Life Archive is roughly, in terms of percentage, gay would be about 40%, lesbian would be about 35, almost 40%, and the remainder would be bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, and other labels. So that's how it breaks down. And the kinds of materials are roughly about the same across the board. There are a lot of writers represented in the Life Archive. So with writers, you get the materials they use to create their books. So their manuscripts, galleys, correspondence, contracts, royalty receipts, promotional materials. So that a lot of that exists in the Life Archive. There are also organizations. Now that's where more males come in because there are more male organizations that are represented, even though the material is scant, meaning that there might be a folder to a box of materials, right? Whereas the lesbian organizations are mainly 1 to 3 folder, represented in 3 to 1 folder materials. So there'll be materials related to founding materials, flyers, maybe agendas and minutes from a meeting, but it's not a lot of stuff. I feel like I'm really young in doing this work, and that the culture, the demonstrably activist culture started really in the 70s. Now, obviously there were queer people before that, but they weren't as documented in mass-produced materials such as books and so forth. There was James Baldwin, there were Audre Lorde, Lorraine Hansberry, but that wasn't a lot of stuff. And as for the remaining parts, the transgender stuff, even though I mentioned earlier it was really lacking, there were articles and other kinds of representations of a trans life happening that in some cases wasn't called trans life because this is a more contemporary term. Bisexuality is also a term that people often go back and place on a person because of his or her or their relationships with other people, such as Lorraine Hansberry, who was married, but also identified as a lesbian. James Baldwin, who had relationships with both men and women. And then as far, yeah, so that's roughly about it. Yeah, I think that's how it breaks down in terms of materials. Yeah.
Obrigado.
No, thank you.
vou fazer mais uma perguntinha, reforçando quem quiser fazer pergunta, gente, está super aberto. Eu não consigo, quem está sem câmera, né? Eu não consigo ver todo mundo, então se alguém que estiver sem câmera e quiser fazer pergunta que não seja pelo chat, mas falando, me interrompa, porque eu consigo escutar e parar. Nesse último, tenho duas perguntas aqui da minha parte. Nesse último trecho, Steven, você falou, por exemplo, sobre autoidentificação de sexualidade como pessoa bi, e você falou também de identidade de gênero, no que tange as pessoas trans e como os vocabulários de autonominação vão mudando ao longo da história. E aí eu fico aqui pensando, gente, num desafio que é como arquivar a vida de pessoas que existiram antes da retórica organizar aquela vida ou dar sentido para ela. Por exemplo, a vida de Pauli Murray. Alguns de vocês podem conhecer Pauli Murray. Né? Pauli Murray é um nome em disputa, porque é uma pessoa que hoje a gente claramente colocaria ali no espectro de gender non-conforming, né? Então de alguém que não entra ali nas categorias tradicionais de gênero, mas que no seu tempo foi percebida como uma mulher lésbica, mas que teve momentos em que se apresentou, seja por carta ou pela própria expressão de gênero, num lugar mais masculino. Então a comunidade trans reivindica Pauli Murray também como uma pessoa que está trans. Então, enfim, eu fico aqui pensando, Steven, não só sobre o In the Life, mas como preservacionistas, arquivistas em gênero, no geral. Como a gente lida com o ato de arquivar coisas, histórias sobre pessoas antes da retórica sobre essas vidas existir? Eu não sei se eu consegui fazer minha pergunta clara, mas é algo nesse caminho.
Oh, no, it's quite clear. It's quite clear, and you hit at the heart of why the In the Life Archive exists. So there's no one that's archived in the Life Archive that did not self-identify as queer in some regard. There were people who wanted to donate things, like my brother was gay, but he never said it, but here's his poetry. And I said, that's fine, but actually we don't collect that because this is an archive where people actually self-identify. And it was the parameters and the brackets were clear, right? I didn't want to go on rumor that somebody may have been queer in some manner, shape, or form. But I occasionally would get requests to archive people who didn't do that. So for example, Lorraine Hansberry, whose papers did not come to the Schomburg Center as a lesbian woman, in her papers, in one of her letters, she identifies as lesbian. She wrote that. So I feel comfortable saying it because she said that. Similarly with Baldwin, who considered himself a homosexual man rather than a gay man. He felt that the term gay came too late for him, that it didn't really explain his life, and that he felt that organizing under a sexual preference wasn't quite the thing he wanted to do or he thought was wise. So he's an ancestor who both identify but also is complicated. I love the complications. As for people who came before the terminology, I think, isn't it funny how people always exist before the terminology exists? And then who gets to call who what, as opposed to self-identifying. So there wasn't any collection at the Schomburg that I went back after I'd heard about a person, male or female, and said, oh, you know, just using Pauli Murray, for example, I wouldn't put those monikers, those labels on her. I felt like that she would have to do that. That's out of respect for that person. So that's, the archive is people first rather than politics first. Does that make sense?
Sim, faz completo sentido e acho isso para mim é um pano para manga, gente. Acho um assunto assim que dá para ir longe, trazendo para outras questões aqui no Brasil, né? Se nós formos fazer uma pesquisa que tenha um recorte exclusivo de pessoas negras, então a gente vai usar o marcador da autoidentificação, por exemplo, né? Então tal pessoa diz que ela é negra, logo ela é elegível para estar dentro das pesquisas, desse recorte, desse arquivo, enfim, né? Mas a construção de raça no Brasil é um negócio muito complexo, então parece que é algo dado, né? Então tem uma dimensão disso que é dado, mas tem uma dimensão disso que é muito mais treta. Então, acho que essa resposta que Steven deu para pensar a questão de uma pessoa como Pauli Murray pode ajudar a gente a pensar outros recortes também. Eu sinto que a gente está encaminhando para o final, porque eu tenho total certeza que muita gente ou vai voltar para a Paulista, como é a conversinha que tem rolado aqui nos meus WhatsApp, ou vai encher a cara, que eu acho muito correto fazer isso. Eu tenho mais uma pergunta para o Steven, que agora não é sobre o In The Life, mas sobre o segundo projeto dele, o Nomadic Archivists Project, que você falou rapidamente como sendo um projeto de arquivistas, você da Miranda, que é móvel, que não está localizado numa instituição e que é móvel. A gente aqui no Brasil lida com uma realidade específica, a gente lida com uma realidade específica de preservação, de recursos. Então, qual tipo de abertura existe para o projeto de vocês para fazer o trabalho que vocês fazem com organizações aqui no Brasil, por exemplo?
Well, the first thing I think that came to mind was the scholarship to assist in to have people apply for the scholarship so that we could help fund or give seed money to an archival initiative. I think that's one thing that we could do. We're also interested in so we go to communities come to us, individuals come to us and say, we want to do this, and we listen to them. Right? So that's how we operate. So if somebody wanted to start some sort of photographic archive in Brazil, we would consult with them, ask them what the aim is, how would they preserve the materials, do they want to make them available to the public, do they want to be a community archive versus an institutional archive, what kind of support do you have in that community, what kind of support are you looking for, is it simply technical? Or is it like technical in terms of taking care of it, providing metadata for digital documentation of it, or digital copies of it? What does the community want? Oftentimes, we feel like institutions do the opposite. They tell you what you should be doing. Where we listen to people and feel like our nomadicness allows a sort of free flow of ideas. We can since both Miranda and I worked in institutions, we know generally what they're up to, good and bad, right? In terms of how they interface with the community. And we can help people who want to work with institutions navigate those institutions. But if they're looking to do something on their own, or if it's just a self-project, we just talk with people. We find out what they're interested in doing, and then we go from there.
Interessante, gente. Temos um caminho, né? Primeiro das bolsas, né? Das scholarships, e depois esse caminho de a comunidade, representantes da comunidade, acessando o projeto deles. Acho que tem um caminho interessante para se pensar. Eu estou falando isso porque eu sinto, Steven, que na nossa oficina, e quando nós selecionamos as pessoas que estão aqui, né, quando eu e a Karen Almeida selecionamos as pessoas, a gente tinha a sensação de que muita gente estava ali no limítrofe de poder ter algum projeto de preservação, mas não sequer sabia que poderia, assim, sequer sabia que tem um caminho para isso, tem uma possibilidade para isso, assim. Então, como você falou na sua palestra, né, esse objetivo de construir, desenvolver uma consciência arquivística, eu sinto que essa é uma das contribuições aqui da oficina, então por isso também essa pergunta. Gente, acho que a gente pode ir encerrando. Eu queria perguntar para Steven se ele gostaria de fazer aquela boa e velha considerações finais, porque aqui, assim que a gente encerra as coisas aqui no Brasil, a gente tem alguns hábitos, e considerações finais é um dos hábitos. Então, faça suas considerações finais, por favor.
Okay, my final words are very simple, and it's that you deserve the benefit of your own experience. And what I mean by that is through archiving, journaling, visually, archiving yourself visually with photographs, doing old histories with your relatives, with yourself at different points in your life, what you think about, what you're doing. You deserve to be able to look back on your experience and have something substantial to listen to read, to look at. And so what I wish for you and everybody on this call, as well as all of your relatives and everybody in the world, is to archive yourself because you matter. And that's it.
Porque se a gente se arquivar, vai que daqui a uns 60 anos alguém vai estar fazendo uma aula que nem a aula que eu fiz com meu pai, né, gente? Daquele jeitinho lá, e a gente vai ser o protagonista dessa história, né? Vamos fazer aquela coisa também jamais... I'm sorry, what?
You guys are. You're the protagonist.
Exatamente. Nós somos os protagonistas. Gente, Steven, obrigado. Você é um lindo, você é maravilhoso, você é muito generoso, muito... A gente recebeu muitos caminhos. Eu estou olhando para você, falando com vocês e olhando para as minhas notas aqui, né? A gente recebeu muitos caminhos, muitas possibilidades, muitas abordagens. O Steven já se colocou à disposição para continuar a interlocução, então esse é um caminho que a gente pode sim fazer. Queria agradecer a presença de Steven aqui hoje, de tomar o tempo, queria agradecer você